we are heading into a world where the digital is becoming more physical and the physical is becoming more digital. A world where shopping and entertainment are one. It's a transition that I dig deep into in the book, and it's all part of my long-held belief that what we are really witnessing is not the dominance of digital over physical or physical over digital, but rather a trading of roles between the two. That media today, in every form, is the store. And stores in almost every form are becoming a media channel, perhaps the most powerful media channel that brands have available to them. But as I suggest in the book, to bring that channel to life, brands have to redefine the unique utility and remarkable value they best represent. The unique purpose your brand serves in the customer's life is your new positioning. In other words, if your brand is the answer, what's the question? It can be a surprisingly difficult question for brands to answer. So with that in mind, I present a framework of 10 archetypal business models that I believe will help them do just that. Moreover, the book examines how each of these archetypes can be brought to life through the most difficult of all feats in retail, a memorable customer experience. Something near and dear to the heart of my next guest. My friend Rachel Shechtman was an early pioneer at the forefront of the experiential retail movement. She's a fourth-generation retail entrepreneur and founder of Story, a concept store known for its editorial and ever-changing approach to retail. Rachel has been recognized as one of Fast Company's 100 most creative people in business, Fortune magazine's 40 Under 40, and Ad Age's 50 most creative. I spoke to Rachel from her place in Colorado about this historic transformation and her work advising to Camp, a New York City-based retailer and an example of what I term the artist archetype. Rachel, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. It's always fun to chat and talk shop with you.
I love our conversations. I have referred to you in conversation with other people as the Aretha Franklin of experiential retail, the queen of experiential retail. And I thought about it the other day, and we've known each other since, I think we met in 2013.
Yeah. When
Story was on fire, and this whole notion of experiential retail was really just sort of, I think a lot of people thought it was kind of the catchphrase du jour at the time. Certainly, it's proven not to be. I guess my first question for you, and we'll just start sort of big and broad. I think people have speculated that maybe the pandemic is the thing that sticks a pin in experiential retail. Others feel that it may actually catalyze an even greater interest in experiential retail. What are your thoughts on that?
I wish I could say I was psychic, so don't take this as gospel, although that is maybe, by the way, the best compliment I have ever gotten, the Aretha Franklin of retail. Like, I'm just going to I need a moment to just soak that in because that's the best compliment I've ever gotten.
Take it. It's yours.
Especially coming from you. I actually, if I were putting my money down, I'd hedge on the fact that it's going to catapult it further forward. Like, of course, it's going to take a little time, but I don't think that it's going to take years and years and years of time. I just think, if there's anything the pandemic has highlighted more than anything is, the convenience of, buying certain products online. And so I think that retailers are going to have to work twice as hard to get someone in a store, which was already hard before the pandemic, and to really satiate what customers are expecting beyond convenience. And that, leads into experience. So my answer on that one is I'm bullish.
Good. And
I think I'm also bullish.
And I think too that we can expect, as money floods back into digital media and that becomes more and more saturated, and we see the costs of digital media exploding, that maybe retailers will start now looking at their stores a little differently. Now, I just want to, I also just want to jump tracks here for a second, because in addition to your own work with Story and the experiential retail platforms that you created at Macy's, You also work with a brand called Camp in New York City. And I know that the founder of Camp, Ben Kaufman, is a friend of yours, and you advise to Camp. Now, Camp is one of the brands in the book that I talk about as a retail archetype. I call Camp the artist brand, the brand that takes products that may not be exclusive or unique in and of themselves, but it creates sort of a theatrical experience around those products, and the experience sort of becomes the product. Can you tell us, Rachel, about Camp, what it is and how it works?
Yeah, sure. So Camp really answers the question for families of what are we going to do today? And they show up and meet families where they are, and that might be online or offline. So we have 5 stores, and then we have a rapidly growing, robust digital experience that really has an impressive editorial engine, an amazing team of talent that's just creating new content, multiple times throughout the day and pushing it out. And if I really had to, sum up Camp, I kind of think of it in 3 distinct buckets, right? So you have our store experiences, which are these magical, immersive universes where you'll walk into a gift canteen and there's a speakeasy magic door that goes into 8,000 square feet of experiential retail. And, similar to Story, there's a thematic element to it, right? So you could have cooking camp or art camp or space camp. The second bucket, I think, is looking at digital. And I think one of the things that the pandemic, did magically was kind of forced brands to think differently about their brand. And while lots of experiential physical retailers were struggling, Camp actually exploded because within days of the shutdown, they launched virtual birthday parties. So around the world, there were thousands of virtual birthday parties happening on a weekly basis. They created a virtual camp for Walmart called Camp by Walmart, where you had Drew Barrymore and LeBron James teaching different classes and so on and so forth. They did virtual white elephant party. There's a secret thing launching in the next month or two, also in this space. So it's kind of looking at how do we cherry pick experiential elements that resonate in a physical world and transform that into a digital world, which I also think is an important trend. So it's not just having e-commerce, but what's something that can be theatrical online. And then the third bucket is really how we work with brands in different ways. I mentioned Camp by Walmart. We created a family field day across the country for Scott's Miracle Grow, where families got outside and did different activities. So lots of different things, never sleeping.
Yeah, no kidding. And you mentioned, you used the word theatrical there. And I find that, I find that really interesting. Ben used the same word when I talked to Ben about the business. He said it's a theatrical experience. And in fact, he actually hires people, and I guess he has sort of pick of the litter these days, but he hires people with Broadway experience. Yeah. People that build sets for Ben or people that build sets for Hamilton. How important is it, if I'm a retailer out there, how important is that notion of theatricality? How important is it for a retailer to understand that? Because I guess where I'm going with this is that oftentimes when I talk to retailers about content, I have a feeling what they're hearing me say is advertising and merchandising. But when we talk about theatricality in the experience, how defined is that? How much work and effort goes into planning that content out?
I mean, I think it might not be there yet, but I think soon enough, that's going to be a non-negotiable in the way, service and price and other elements were. I mean, again, the caveat here being, it depends on your market and your audience and your sector and stuff like that, of course. But I think it's a non-negotiable. I think, we have content everywhere, every millisecond, new content from every angle. So why shouldn't brands and retailers be, creators of content, distributors of content, orchestrators of content? Like, I just think that if we don't start seeing brands, facilitate and author content in compelling, engaging ways, I think over time, that will be a problem. I think it's a need to have, not a nice to have. I think Gucci's someone who's amazing at it. And I think, content shows up in different ways, right? Content can be the partnerships you do. Content can be literal content you create. But I think it's a non-negotiable.
So if you were going to give one piece of advice to a retailer out there who is in the midst of the pandemic, obviously concerned, trying to make it through it, wants to take that first step to really embark on an experiential retail platform, what would be the first key piece of advice that you would give them?
One piece of advice? You're limiting me?
One piece. Do or die.
Do or die piece of advice. I'm hesitating because I feel like it's hard to give a piece of advice. Not, what advice you would give LVMH is very different than what you would give Goodyear Tire.
True.
So, but I think in general, I would say make sure you have someone on the executive team who's in charge of customer experience, because I don't want to say that as a cop-out and a catch-all, but like at the end of the day, like I always say, like what's something you're giving your customer that you can't get on your couch? And like, are we really thinking holistically about it? And it's definitely not new store. And when I say experience, to be clear, I'm not talking about new carpet and new store fixtures.
Right.
I'm talking about like reimagining your customer service in store. I'm talking about like hiring people from unlikely places. Like, Ben lists for sales associates or camp counselors, as they call them, in Playbill. That's genius, right? Like, I'm not interested in someone who has 20 years experience working on the floor of a department store. I want someone who's theatrical and engaging, right? And who's going to tell a story. So I think like if I was limited to one piece of advice, it would be hire a chief experience officer and make it important, like not make it a figurehead, and give it a seat at the table and a megaphone.
And take risks. I mean, all the things that you just mentioned are risks. As soon as we stop doing the norm, right, we're into the territory of risk. I'm going to say it again. You are the Aretha Franklin of experiential retail. Rachel Shechtman, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me.